produce
Yeah.
good content, use AI to assist you in the creation of it, the curation of the content, the enhancement of the content, the outlining, like use it, but don't think you can take humans out of the loop. It's just not a viable thing right now. And nor do I think it should be the goal. Welcome to the Marketing AI Show, the podcast that helps your business grow smarter by making artificial intelligence approachable and actionable. You'll hear from top authors, entrepreneurs, researchers, and executives as they share case studies, strategies, and technologies that have the power to transform your business and your career. My name is Paul Roetzer. I'm the founder of Marketing AI Institute, and I'm your host. Welcome to episode 54 of the Marketing AI Show. I'm your host, Paul Roetzer, along with my co-host, Mike Kaput. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Good, man. I feel like we haven't seen each other. We've been traveling. We've been, holidays. God, I feel like we've been out of rhythm here. So it's good to be back with the weekly. I think I'm on vacation next week. We may have to record on Friday. I didn't even think about this. Heads up, we might have to record Friday. I'm out of the office next week. Hopefully, we are now back in our weekly schedule, back in our regular flow. So for our regular listeners, welcome back. Hopefully we are smooth sailing from here on out. Do you have any vacation coming up I need to know about? I don't know. We got Macon at the end of the month.
Yeah, a little bit in August, but nothing that interrupts the podcast.
All right. So hopefully we are back. All right. So this episode 54 again, is brought to us by Jasper. We're big fans of Jasper. We've been using Jasper for a while. So Jasper is a generative AI platform transforming marketing content creation for teams and businesses. Unlike other AI solutions, Jasper leverages the best cross-section of models and can be trained on your brand voice for greater reliability and brand control. With features like brand voice and campaigns, it offers efficiency with consistency that's critical to maintaining a cohesive brand. Jasper has won the trust of more than 100,000 customers, including Canva, Intel, DocuSign, CB Insights, and Sports Illustrated, and Marketing AI Institute. As a customer, I could say that. Jasper works anywhere with extensions, integrations, and APIs that enable on-brand content acceleration on the go. Sign up free or book a custom demo with an AI expert at jasper.ai. That is JASPER.ai. All right, Mike, we are back. Let's do it. If you're new to the podcast, 3 main topics and rapid fire. We have lots of rapid fire today, so we're going to try and move quick and get this thing done as efficiently as possible. Let's go.
All right. First up, we have ChatGPT Code Interpreter is now available, for everyone. So OpenAI announced on July 6th that over the next week following that date, ChatGPT's Code Interpreter feature is going to be made available to all ChatGPT Plus users. I actually just got access this morning. So if you are a Plus user, you're probably going to see it rolling out very, very soon by the time you're listening to this. So previously, only select users had received access after signing up for a waitlist. So now everybody who pays $20 a month for ChatGPT Plus has Code Interpreter. And what this does is it gives you the ability to do a lot of interesting things using code and data. So it gives you the ability to run code, to use files that you upload to actually produce output. So you can ask questions of or create visualizations from data in certain files you upload. You can analyze data, you can create charts, and you can perform sophisticated math. So you're essentially using an add-on feature within ChatGPT to do these types of data analysis and code-dependent tasks. Now, here's a few examples of ways we've seen people already using Code Interpreter. So first, you could have ChatGPT segment your customer list. If you upload a spreadsheet with customer information, you can instruct ChatGPT to segment it effectively. I saw several examples of this online. You can have it gather and visualize data. One user I saw use ChatGPT with Code Interpreter to actually pull public data from the International Monetary Fund and automatically turn that into a visualized chart. You can also analyze data really effectively. So Wharton professor Ethan Malik, who we follow very closely, has actually done things like upload an unformatted data from a PDF into Code Interpreter and ask it to perform full data analysis. And Code Interpreter was actually able to figure out the table layout, restructure the data and the formatting. It could run models and then reason about the results from seemingly pretty simple prompts. So this is a really powerful add-on. And Malik, I think, thinks it's one of the more powerful AI tools that we're seeing out there in the market today. So, Paul, first off, I think you've read about it, played around with the tool a bit. What kind of use cases do you see for something like this for marketers or business leaders?
Yeah, I actually I've had access to it for like 4 weeks, and I haven't tested it until recently. I finally found time to get in there and play around with it. Um, I think Ethan Malik's takes are probably the best I have seen on this tool because he's been sharing his experimentation with it for a while. And just a quick plug, Ethan Malik is actually one of the keynotes at MACON this year, so July 26th to 28th. He will be our day one closing keynote, I think. I think it's the July 27th keynote. So I'm really looking forward to interviewing him because it's just going to be fireside chat style. But there's so many amazing things he's written, many related to Code Interpreter recently. But he posted just on July 9th on Twitter, and he's just Malik, Mollick, at Malik. So he said, Code Interpreter for Analysis FAQ. Yes, it is useful and powerful tool for real work. No, it is not appropriate for all types of tasks today. Yes, it will get more capable. No, it doesn't replace data analysts. It's a complement. Yes, you'll need to know some statistics and check the AI. So he then went on to say it operates at the level of a pretty good grad student on most data analysis tasks. It's surprisingly adept, but still makes occasional mistakes and bad choices that a more experienced human would not. However, you can quickly check the analysis. So I think for me, my experience, my understanding of the technology, what I've read about it, and then now what I've experimented with myself, it it does give data analysis capabilities where you previously probably didn't have them. Like if you don't have data analysts on staff, you now can have a grad or post grad level data analyst to do a lot of this work. So anywhere where you need to analyze data from, take your email campaigns and drop it in and say, well, what's interesting about this data? Where's it performing well? What are the anomalies in the data sets? Run graphs, run charts. The thing I found, the experiment I ran was last year I created this AI talent index. So you're familiar with this, Mike. We basically what I was doing was I took sales navigator data, LinkedIn sales navigator data, and I built a workbook where I was trying to find the most likely job titles and industries where AI adoption would be sooner than others. And because, pre ChatGPT, it was kind of hard to find people who were adopting AI, who were piloting and scaling in their organizations. So I had this theory of if you looked at different job titles and you looked at different verticals and then seniority levels, we could probably find some kind of get ahead of the adoption curve and find the personas and the people that were more likely to pursue AI knowledge and tools, and therefore, as an institute, be interested in the content we create in our events and our online courses. So I have this database. And I was like, well, that's a good starting point. And so what I had learned from kind of following Ethan's guidance and some others is sometimes you just start with like a really basic thing. So I took this data set, downloaded it from Google Sheets, and it's pretty straightforward data, but again, it's just a bunch of Sales Navigator data. And I just said, review the data set and identify the best titles and industries to target for AI education and events. So again, just real simple, not giving it much. It first went through and did an analysis of the data set. So it says like the data set seems to be a list of different job titles with corresponding functions and metrics related to adoption and impact of AI and automation. It include counts of roles globally, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes through like column by column and gives you its interpretation of what the data is. And it was all accurate. So it says to determine the best titles and industries to target for education and events, we can consider roles with high adoption likelihood. And it kind of goes on. It's like, okay, this is pretty interesting. And then it says, let's continue with the analysis. And then it then goes through and actually starts analyzing the data. And then it comes back with, based on the combined rating of adoption, likelihood, and automation impact, which were two variables I created, like subjective assessments of these things. Here's the top 10 titles to target for AI education and events. It then like force ranks the top 10. It then goes through and ranks the top 7 industries based on size. So then I said, can you create visualizations to help tell the story of the data and market opportunities? It then created 2 bar charts that showed the data by title and by industry. And then it analyzed those and explained what was showing. I then said adoption likelihood and intelligent automation impact are subjective ratings that I created and estimated. What else should I be thinking about for target audiences? It then went through and gave me 8 different things I should think about enriching this data set with. Now, Code Interpreter is not connected to the internet, so it couldn't go do this for me. But it said you could look at current AI usage, growth of a role or industry, technological readiness, regulatory environment, like all these really interesting things that it's like, those would be interesting data sets. And then I said, what data sources do you have access to that you could use to enrich it? And that's when it's like, well, hey, I don't have access to the internet, but here's ways I could go get this data. And then I said, what questions should we be asking about this data set that could lead to interesting strategic insights? This is, to me, where it starts getting really interesting. This is the data analyst side where I may be a business leader, I may be a marketer, and I look at a data set, it's like, I don't even know what to ask this thing. Like, I don't
Mm.
live in data sets all day long. I don't know how to build charts outside of a bubble chart and a bar graph and, heat maps. It's like, I don't know all the different visualizations that can exist. So I just said, like, what should I be asking of it? And it came back with 6 really good questions, like things, some of them I hadn't thought to ask of the data. And then I said, what are some creative ways we could visualize this data? And it came back with a heat map, bubble chart, tree map, box and whisker plots. I don't even know if that's a real thing. Like stacked bar chart, network graph. And so, and then I said, can you please build these for me? Build me a heat map. So all of these things it did. So everything I'm explaining right now, it just did in real time. And so take any data set, anything about churn, about growth, about audience, about persona building, about target markets, whatever it is, that's what this now does. You can upload any style document to it and it'll just analyze it. So as a marketer, the potential uses of this are massive. And it really does, like, again, it's not a replacement to data scientists and data analysts. It does have the ability to code and do all these interesting things, but I think in the near term, it's just going to be additive. It's going to give marketers and business leaders access to technology and capabilities that they probably just didn't have on their team, or they didn't have the time or resources to see through. So I don't know. I mean, this is, if you imagine this, Mike, like we're big HubSpot users. Can you imagine if
Mhm.
this capability just lived in HubSpot
Right.
and we could just ask questions of our data and build charts on the fly rather than having to learn, how to go in and build custom reports and all that stuff? Like, I don't want to do that. I just want to ask it to do it for me.
That's really interesting you mentioned that because, you and I come from the agency world, and I was thinking about how I would have killed to have this tool
Oh my
on the
gosh, yeah.
agency side, right? Not only for our own business, but for our clients. I mean, this constituted a good amount of the questions we had hoped to be asking about clients' businesses when we could actually get at the data.
Yeah, the one I was thinking about as I was doing this is, so if anyone's taken our state of the industry survey that I think we're closing that down this
Yeah,
week, I believe.
yep.
So we're going to be going through and do the data analysis. Well, Mike and I have been doing that for years on our own. Like we export the data from the survey. I think we have over 800 or 900 responses this
Yep.
year. It's like to 19 or 20 different questions. And then you have all the profile data. Well, that's me and Mike building pivot tables and going through and doing analysis and then building charts based on, I mean, we're talking about dozens of hours to analyze
Mhm.
this survey data. That's a perfect use case for it. Just dump it in and say, what correlations do you see in this data? Like, what is interesting about that? And then just kind of like ask it questions. But we can do that because we have worked that data for years.
Right.
We already know the insights we look for. You could even feed it the PDF of last year's report and
Mhm.
say, here's last year's report, draft findings based on this format for this year. Start there and then say, like, what else are we missing? So my mind just immediately, when you start playing with this, is like, oh my gosh, like all the use cases, all the times we're working with data where we don't really love it. Like, I mean, I love finding the insights in the data. I hate having to go in and remember how to build the pivot tables properly. And like,
Right.
I don't do it more than like a few times a year. So it's just not my expertise, but I'm not going to pay a data analyst to do it. Like, we can do it. We just don't necessarily enjoy that part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Spoiler, we will absolutely be using it for the state of the industry report. Even, I think in some of the examples too, I don't think people realize even the low hanging fruit with stuff like this. In the state of the industry example, even my ability to upload the spreadsheet and say, build tables out of these different columns, that took hours before we had to do it just to see numbers.
Right.
baseline numbers to even extract insights from.
Yeah, or it may be like we've historically used pie charts and bar graphs because
Yeah.
that's what we know to do. You could say, what are some other creative ways we could be visualizing this in this report?
Yeah.
We know, man, we may still need to go build them, from a high res perspective or what. I don't know how the charts, how well they export. But yeah, the other thing I'll share real quick, I had this like perfect use case in my head that I can't do now. So for Ethan's fireside chat at Macon, I have like 15 of his articles from his newsletter that like I want to base the interview on, just like things I want to explore with him. And so what I thought about doing was creating an Excel file that had those links in it and then just uploading that to Code Interpreter and saying, go step by step through each of these links and find 5 to 7 interesting questions to ask about each of the articles. Now, I was going to still go through myself, and I've read every article multiple times, like so I could assess it. But because it's not connected to the internet, I can't do that. So I'm
Right.
probably actually going to have to do a one-off where I'll use GPT-4 with the browser connection, and I'll just go one by one and do it just to see what happens. And I may actually use it as an experiment with Bard um, and maybe Anthropic or something. Like I may play around with our inflection and
Yeah.
see how it does with that use case.
Yeah. That's awesome. Um, in less awesome news, the second big topic we're talking about today is that there have been a handful of stories in the past several weeks that are kind of shedding light on the dangers and misuse of AI in content and media. There's some horror stories kind of coming out about this. First up, a report from a misinformation tracking site called NewsGuard showed that there are a ton of content farms that are now using AI to generate hundreds of low quality articles a day and then raking in programmatic ad dollars. With programmatic ads, companies might be showing up on sites that they have no knowledge about by signing up to a programmatic ad network like Google's ads. Hundreds of brands NewsGuard found are unwittingly ending up displayed on these sites. And unfortunately, otherwise legitimate media sites are kind of following the lead here. So, in another story, tech site Gizmodo recently started publishing AI generated content, trying to publish more frequently using AI, and they got very problematic results. For instance, one article that they published on the Star Wars movies, just kind of like a list of them chronologically and some about the movies, it was riddled with inaccuracies, and it prompted this big backlash and outcry from Gizmodo staff because they're looking at these stories saying, they said things like, quote, they're actively hurting our reputations and credibility, and they show, quote, zero respect for journalists. So the company is trying to use AI, failing at it, and their human writers are up in arms about it. And then, kind of last but certainly not least, news recently came out of a leaked email from a German tabloid named Bild. And it details how this publication plans to pretty overtly just replace over 100 jobs with AI. So in the email, the tabloid said that, quote, unfortunately, be parting ways with colleagues who have tasks that in the digital world are performed by AI and or automated processes. The email also detailed that the people who'd be replaced by AI include, quote, editors, print production staff, sub-editors, proofreaders, and photo editors, and that these careers, quote, will no longer exist as they do today. Now, that's just kind of one publication, but it is notable to say that they are owned by a company called Axel Springer, which is a major European publishing house. And they also own other well-known publications like Business Insider and Politico. So there are some fears that this could be kind of more widespread. So, Paul, I want to start with the Gizmodo story specifically because you had posted about this on LinkedIn saying, quote, every brand and media company should be experimenting with AI-assisted content, but not like this. So how should companies be experimenting with AI content?
Yeah, the next sentence was, it's lazy. It gives the appearance of a complete lack of understanding around how the technology works. I mean, I'm honestly just shocked that a major media outlet would make this kind of misstep. Like it's just it looks really, really bad.
Mm,
I mean, I think it destroys the trust, certainly of the team, the audience. If I'm reading something and I'm expecting it to be correct from a trusted source and it's not, I'm going to get really annoyed. So I just feel like it was obvious and inevitable that people were going to use this technology to take shortcuts. Um, I think there's a lot of financial pressure on these media outlets. Certainly, there's probably a lot of pressure to be, integrating the technology. There's probably a lot of push to drive efficiency and reduce the reliance on human writers. Like, I mean, nobody wants to talk about it, but it is absolutely a reality of these, whether they're owned by private equity or they're publicly traded, there is going to be massive pressure to downsize teams if they think they can achieve high level outputs. Now,
Mm.
Gizmodo and other outlets are basically like, hey, this is a piece of content that just wouldn't have been written otherwise. Like, we're not replacing writers necessarily. We're just creating it. It's like, yeah, right. But you're testing AI to write this stuff to say, end of the day, you're all about generating revenue through ads and clicks. So if you can do that through crap content written by AI instead of quality content written by humans, there's going to be a pretty high motivation to do that. So it's just a downward spiral that inevitably leads to like collapse of these
Mm.
companies. Like I really don't get how this is not obvious that this doesn't end well. So whether it is, just having some random stuff written by AI and not even like somebody left a comment in my LinkedIn thing about verify and edit. It's like just verify and edit. Like you can have the AI write the Star Wars story, but have
Hmm.
someone on the staff who knows the Star Wars chronology or can use Wikipedia, have an
Yeah.
intern, somebody goes through and make sure this is correct. So this idea that you're just trusting this tech to just pump something out. So either they don't understand how the tech works and that it makes stuff up, or they don't care. Neither of those looks good on the editorial team.
Yeah.
And so if you're a brand or a media company, just you should care about the output of your content. It shouldn't just be about like ad dollars or search results because eventually you're going to just destroy your brand doing that. And it's not going to take very long. So, I mean, stuff like this is just maddening to me. Either it's just really bad leadership that just doesn't get it, or they just don't care.
Mm.
And neither of those is a good scenario.
No. So when it comes to like the AI generated content farms, I was just kind of curious, like if these businesses, for instance, or the Gizmodos of the world think that they're able to make money doing this, then clearly they're attracting some type of traffic to their sites by doing this, who they then show programmatic ads to. Like, is this going to be a problem that Google needs to solve, especially as Google has not come out and said AI generated content necessarily is bad?
Yeah, you would think. And there was an article, I don't believe we have it in the show notes, and I'd have to go back and find it, but there was an article a week or so ago about all these major brands that were appearing along this horrible AI generated content.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a reckoning from an ad perspective too. And also, it's just like, how long does the content farm game last? Like,
Hmm.
you and I, when did you start working at PR 2020? Was it like 2000?
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, people don't know the history. So I owned an agency called PR 2020. We were HubSpot's first partner back in '07. Mike joined me there in 2012 as a content specialist, a writer.
Yep.
That was around the time when content farms were exploding. So
Hmm.
people were paying like 1 to 3 cents per word. I started in the industry in 2000, and the going rate was like about $1 per word, but depending on how highly technical it was, maybe it was be $2 to $3 per word for like scientific papers or advanced B2B papers, something like that. But then it started like kind of coming down. And by 2012, 2013, you had these content farm companies that were cropping up that were charging literally like 1 to 3 cents per word.
Yeah.
And that's what we were fighting against as an agency was like, no, we're not going to discount the quality of our content. You're paying for junk. Like they're not even verifying this stuff. And it's almost like we're living through that again, except now AI can be the content farm and it can probably be less than a penny per word.
Hmm.
But to what end? Like the content farm game didn't work. AOL tried to do it with what was it, patch something
Yeah.
or other. They came out
Yeah.
with that junk site. And from the outside, you watch this stuff happen. You're like, this isn't going to work. Like, yeah, you may make some money for a year or two, but this is a horrible business model. And I just feel like I'm watching it all over again. Like this is just except at a whole nother scale. And it just never works. Just, I don't know, produce
Yeah.
good content, use AI to assist you in the creation of it, the curation of the content, the enhancement of the content, the outlining, like use it, but don't think you can take humans out of the loop. Like it's just not a viable thing right now. And nor do I think it should be the goal.
Amen. All right. Third topic for today. We're going to kind of talk through why and how investors are betting on generative AI? Because we've seen some research recently by McKinsey that estimates that generative AI as a category could add the equivalent of 2.6 to 4.4 trillion dollars of annual value alone to the global economy. And they actually estimate that about 75% of that value will accrue through four use cases, which they categorize as customer operations, marketing and sales, software engineering, and R&D. They also detail the impact will be felt across all industries and sectors, but specifically point out that banking, high tech, and life sciences could see a huge impact. Now, this full research report is far beyond the purview of this discussion. Maybe we can cover it in depth another time. It's well worth a read. But the larger point here is that this possible market impact of generative AI is simply massive. And we've seen in the past week or two, investors are clearly responding to that because they've just written a couple of huge checks to leading generative AI companies. Now, first up, Inflection AI, who we've talked about quite a bit, announced it raised $1.3 billion in a fresh fundraising round that was led by Microsoft, Reid Hoffman, who started LinkedIn, Bill Gates, and NVIDIA. And what's crazy is Inflection AI has been around just over a year. And in that time, they've built one of the world's most sophisticated large language models. And this model powers Pi, their personal AI assistant product. The company is also building the, quote, largest AI cluster in the world, comprising 22,000 NVIDIA H100 Tensor Core GPUs. It's also important to note that Inflection AI CEO and co-founder Mustafa Suleyman also co-founded DeepMind, which was acquired by Google back in 2014 and forms the backbone of that company's AI projects. Now, at the same time, I think it was on the exact same day, Runway, which is a suite of generative AI tools for creators, announced a $141 million extension to its Series C funding round. And that was participated in by companies like Google, NVIDIA, Salesforce Ventures, and other huge investors. Now, I wanted to start off here, Paul, by connecting some dots. Like, why are investors writing such enormous checks for generative AI companies, especially as the overall startup funding environment seems to be slowing down a little bit?
Well, these are the companies building the foundational models, for one. So, we've talked about in the generative AI tech stack, you have the kind of infrastructure companies, like the cloud and the chip companies like NVIDIA, and then Google, AWS, Microsoft. And then you have kind of the model companies that are building the foundational models that then you can build application or software on top of. So these investments, like Runway's building their own models, Inflection is certainly building a massive foundational model. They also announced last week that they're within a few months will have the second largest supercomputer in the world. So they're raising all this money because they are investing massively in the infrastructure, in the chips, the GPUs, so they can have this this massive cluster of these GPUs to do this stuff, to train these models. And it takes a lot of money. So I think the reason you're seeing massive checks is a lot of this money ends up going back to NVIDIA to buy GPUs. So to build and train these massive models, Cohere, they just raised what it was 100 and some million, at a couple $1 billion valuation. So that's why it takes a lot of money to build these foundational models to train them. So that's why we're seeing it there. And then in the application layer, you've seen less, at least we're not hearing about it as much at the kind of the SaaS model layer, because it's really hard to know who to make a bet on. So right now it seems like a lot of money is funneling into these like 5 or 6 foundation model companies that appear to be the best bets moving forward to be, built on top of. Inflection in particular is quite interesting. We talked about it recently on the podcast a few times. I've been testing Pi. It's designed to be more personal and empathetic and conversational. So if you haven't explored it yet, you can go test it out for free. It asks a lot of questions. Like when you ask it to do something rather than just outputting something like ChatGPT would, like write me an essay on this, and then GPT just writes it. The Inflection will say, tell me more about the audience you're writing for, or what are the goals of the piece? So it's designed to kind of be more kind of conversational, I guess, and iterative. The one other thing that caught my attention yesterday was, so Mustafa Suleyman was not active on Twitter for a pretty long time. It was very, periodically. which, by the way, we don't have threads in the conversation this week. We should probably have a word or two about threads at the end of this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, so Twitter, which is still my primary vehicle for learning the things and keeping up on the AI space, he tweeted yesterday, soon LLMs will know when they don't know. They'll know when to say, I don't know, or instead ask another AI or ask a human or use a different tool or a different knowledge base. This will be a hugely transformative moment. So this is kind of a little, I guess, side conversation here, but um, one of the big issues we've talked about with LLMs is they make stuff up, they hallucinate, and you can't trust them. They'll make up citations, they'll make up facts, places, people, whatever. One of the key areas of pursuit right now within the research labs is how do we solve this? How do we solve hallucination? We've talked about Sundar Pichai in the 60 Minutes episode back in like March or April said, like, we're making progress, but we don't know. So the general consensus up until now is like, they don't really know how to solve it. But here we have Inflection raising 1.3 billion, and I believe they're actively raising more now. I think they plan to raise like 10 billion plus. You have the CEO and the founder saying, this is something we think is solvable. And oftentimes what happens is like a Sam Altman or Mustafa, they're tweeting something that they're actively working on and that they feel like they've made significant progress on, to the point where they're going to publicly say, this is solvable. So one of the challenges of large language models, especially in corporations, for marketers, for brands, for businesses, is this unreliability issue. And so now you have a company that just raised 1.3 billion with a CEO saying, hey, I think we can solve this. And so I would just, again, like, you just never know when the state of this stuff is going to flip. And if we can get to a point where this kind of funding is able to them to build the kind of models that actually solve for hallucination in whatever path they choose to do it, it's a really big deal. And that's why, like, when somebody raises kind of money, like I put on LinkedIn, like, hey, if you're not following Inflection, like, you got to follow them.
Yeah.
This is where the innovation comes from, and you got to pay attention to what they're saying.
So if I'm a marketer or a business leader looking at generative AI tools, models, I mean, how should I be thinking about making my own bets? Not necessarily from an investment perspective, but from where to allocate time and budget to generative AI companies and platforms, given how fiercely competitive this space is.
Yeah, it's tricky. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like, what is the buying process for an LLM or for
Hmm.
the applications? And I don't know that it's defined yet. I don't know that there's a correct way to do this, because you can, like, what I'll tell organizations, like there's a big enterprise we've been talking to lately, kind of doing some consulting work for. And I said, okay, like, you're a Microsoft shop, start with Microsoft. Like,
Hmm.
you start with the core tech stack, because if you're in a big enterprise, you're talking about massive procurement. You got to get through IT, you got to get through security, you got to get through all these issues, regulatory, if you're, in a highly regulated industry. So your best bet is going to be, if you have AWS, Google, or Microsoft, there's a really good chance you're working with one of those companies. And if you're a big enterprise, you have a relationship with them, a high up relationship, start there. And then you're going to go out and look at it, like, okay, what are the other language models we should be talking to? What are the application layer companies we should be talking to? And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have, like, let's say you take a big enterprise, like a financial services company. There's a chance that the marketing team is going to just move forward with a Jasper or a writer or something at
Hmm.
that application layer, just so they can get started, because there's obvious use cases and these are solutions built for the enterprise for those specific use cases. And so then you're going to have the enterprise overall that's going to be looking at long-term, what's our play with language model or language models, and how do we build them into the organization? But that's going to take a long time. Whereas you can, like, jump in and start using an application company, a SaaS company, tomorrow for marketing. So I think there's going to be this mix of near term, let's just go get an application layer company. And then mid to long term, let's start talking to these foundation model companies and seeing if we can build our own, or go get an open source model like a Falcon 40 or
Hmm.
Llama, whatever, and like build our own language models internally. It's just, I haven't seen anybody who's solved for this yet, but a lot of people are asking us these questions.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into rapid fire topics. We have a ton of them, so we'll move pretty fast here. First up, VentureBeat recently published a really interesting in-depth Q&A with Aidan Gomez, who is the co-founder and CEO of Cohere, a leading AI company we talk about often on the podcast. Now, This interview covered a ton of ground and is well worth reading, but what jumped out to us, I think, was Gomez's thoughts on the future of large language models. So what kind of stood out to you as notable in that context in the interview?
Yeah, so I'll read the excerpt that caught my attention, and then I'm going to follow it up with some context from a Lex Friedman podcast that I happen to be listening to like a few days after I read this. So the excerpt that caught me was he said, "I think there's a way in which synthetic data leads to the exact opposite of model collapse, like information and knowledge discovery, expanding a model's knowledge beyond what is shown in its human data." So what we mean here is right now these models learn from human data. They read the internet, they watch videos, they look at images, whatever. That they learn from stuff that humans created. He went on to say that feels like the next frontier, the next unlock for another very steep increase in model performance, getting these models to be able to self-improve, to expand their knowledge by themselves without a human having to teach them that knowledge. So synthetic data, meaning it just makes its own data. Um, he went on to say, I think that because we're starting to run up on the extent of human knowledge, so meaning we're going to run out of human knowledge to give it anymore. It will have learned everything we've created. And then as we create new stuff, it's keeping up with it at a superhuman scale. So it's like, it's not going to learn anything new from us. He wanted to say, we're starting to run up on the extent and breadth of the data we can provide these models that give them new knowledge. As you start to approach the performance of the best humans in a particular field, there are increasingly few people for you to turn to get new knowledge. So these models have to be able to discover new knowledge by themselves without relying on humanity's existing knowledge. It's inevitable. I see that as the next major breakthrough. So that to me, again, is interesting. Like back in February, we're going to talk about the world of bits in a minute. I know it's one of our items today. Back in February, I looked out and said, okay, everyone's working on action right now. They're working on AI agents being able to take these models beyond just prompts to outputs to actually doing action. And so when you see a quote like this, it's like, oh, okay, so action is definitely happening. And now synthetic data is becoming a major. Because if he's talking about this, then every other research lab is thinking the similar ideas and probably exploring it. So then I happened to be listening to Mark Andreessen Horowitz, Netscape, Mark Andreessen, the legendary Silicon Valley guy. And he's on an interview with Lex Friedman, and this topic comes up. They start talking about large language model training data. And is it possible the majority of future training data will be human conversations with AI agents? So they're actually saying, like, when you're talking to Inflections Pi, that conversation and its outputs to you, what it's saying to you, synthetic data, it's creating it, that becomes training data for future LLM. So now all of a sudden, all these outputs from these machines, all these conversations, when you ask it something, that data becomes a new data training set. So in theory, that kind of makes sense. But then they went into like, is it actually learning anything though? So his point, what Andreessen was saying was, you can ask the LLM to create anything. Give it a hypothetical scenario of like, whatever, debating, the future of business and the role of LLMs in the future of marketing tech stacks and whatever it may be. And then that output becomes training data for the next set. So that synthetic data that it created. So he's saying, is there a signal in there? This is the exact quote. Is there a signal in there that's additive to the content that was used to train it in the first place? So one argument, the information theory argument that he presented, is that it's completely useless. The AI output comes from the human generated content it was trained on. So there's actually nothing new. The analogy he gave is like empty calories. It doesn't help. So I ask it a question, it generates some synthetic data, but that synthetic data came from its training set of human data. So is it really creating anything new to train on? And then there's an opposite that says, no, like it actually is. And so he said, this is the $1 trillion question. Like someone will make or lose $1 trillion, whether synthetic data actually works as training data or not. So it's a little bit more of like kind of an abstract topic to be thinking about, but it's critical to the future here. And you're going to be hearing a lot more about synthetic data and whether or not it can actually be used to improve these models.
So another related topic here that you touched on is this idea of autonomous AI agents. So systems that can take actions for you online. So one example of this is like if you could ask an AI agent, hey, go find me the 3 cheapest flights to Cleveland for July 26th to the 28th, and then book one that is within my budget or whatever. And it can go actually do these actions for you in your web browser. So it's still really early days for these types of systems, but we've definitely thought it's worth paying attention to. And you mentioned your concept called World of Bits that you had published about earlier this year. And you kind of have started revisiting some of these thoughts in the last few weeks. Can you tell us a little bit more about World of Bits and how it relates to this overall topic?
Yeah, so I would say check out the link in the show notes. We're going to spend a ton of time on this today, but basically the premise was World of Bits was a research paper from like 2017 at OpenAI. This guy, Andrej Karpathy, who we've talked about on the show before, who then went on to head up AI at Tesla. And now he's back at OpenAI. And back in February, I was trying to figure out why did he go back? Like, what is he doing back at OpenAI? And that's when I realized that their theory of World of Bits, this idea that the machines could actually take actions, keyboard clicks, or mouse clicks, keyboard, inputting information, filling out forms, that they thought the breakthroughs that occurred that could now make this possible, that we could now build AI agents that could take actions on our behalf. So if you're a marketer, rather than doing the 21 steps to send an email in HubSpot, you tell the machine to send the email. Or the example I gave at the beginning, rather than me learning how to build custom reports and then doing these visualizations and figuring out which charts to use, I just asked Code Interpreter to do it for me, and it just built the stuff for me. So we're now entering this world where these AI agents will be taking actions. It's early, but it's accelerating very quickly, and there's lots of money being poured into it. So if you want to understand why and where this is going, go read that World of Bits article that I wrote, and it'll give you all the context of what's happening and kind of why it's moving so quickly.
So, OpenAI actually just published an article titled Introducing Super Alignment, in which they announced the company's intent to build a team around what they're kind of aligning a super intelligence. So, OpenAI says they believe, quote, super intelligence, which is kind of AI systems vastly smarter than humans, could arrive in the next decade. But they worry that no solution exists to make sure that a super intelligent system would actually follow human intent. And OpenAI has now said that they intend to create a solution to this, saying they are going to dedicate 20% of their current compute and a team led by co-founder Ilya Sutskever to solve this problem ideally within 4 years. Now, Paul, can you kind of put this into context for us? Because superintelligence arriving this decade seems like a pretty bold prediction, but one they're taking seriously.
Yeah, and this all connects back to like this AI is a threat to humanity and some of the stuff we've talked about recently that's been in the news about some of the concerns long term. So again, just like a little historical context here, Ilya was a co-founder of DNN Research with Jeff Hinton, who is the Google guy who left and said AI is going to destroy humanity. They created something called AlexNet back in 2012 that achieved this amazing benchmark within the ImageNet competition, which is like computer vision, basically, and set off what we're seeing today. The deep learning movement that is being commercialized now in language and vision and video and all this stuff, it really kind of goes back to that moment in 2012 at ImageNet. So Ilya is a very important figure in the deep learning movement of the last 10 plus years. Co-founder and chief scientist at OpenAI. So the fact that he's working on this matters. That's a significant thing. This is one of the things that has been talked about as trying to solve these threats, is that we need to put way more resources toward thinking about this and working on these solutions. Now, when superintelligence occurs and how we sort of jump from AGI to superintelligence all of a sudden as like the thing, nobody really knows. But like Nick Bostrom wrote the superintelligence book, was that 20 years ago? I mean, this isn't a new concept, or at least the original research paper was from like 1997 or 1998.
Yeah.
So a couple of quick excerpts that jumped out to me. When you look at the article from OpenAI, they say superintelligence will be the most impactful technology humanity has ever invented and could help us solve many of the world's most important problems. But the vast power of superintelligence could also be very dangerous and lead to the disempowerment of humanity or even human extinction. So, a little light Tuesday conversation here. Here we focus on superintelligence rather than AGI to stress a much higher capability level. We have a lot of uncertainty over the speed of the development of the tech over the next few years. So we hope to aim for the more difficult target to align a much more capable. So basically, if we try and solve superintelligence, we'll figure out the AGI thing along the way. And then, will save humanity basically. Um, so yeah, and just like quick definition. So super intelligence, I'll go to the Nick Bostrom definition. By super intelligence, we mean an intellect that is much smarter than the best human brains in practically every field, including scientific creativity, general wisdom, and social skills. Um, so basically, it's game over. Like these things are just better than us at
Mm.
everything, and so it's a world that's really hard to imagine. It's hard to sit here and have a realistic conversation about because it's so abstract to conceive of. Um, but yeah, it's interesting that they're working on it. They're putting a lot of resources toward it. They have obviously a lot of compute and money to throw at this, and they have a lot of brains to work on it. So, I mean, if nothing else, I think there's going to be some insane research coming out of this, and I assume they're going to be sharing a lot of their findings along the way. So, I think it will lead to a lot of innovation around safety and alignment, which is
Mm.
good. Who knows if they'll ever solve for the super alignment or if it's ever going to be needed, but I think it's going to accelerate a lot of the safety and alignment innovation, which is, I guess, a good thing.
So Google DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis, who we've talked about quite a bit on the podcast, says that his team is using techniques from AlphaGo, which is the famous AI system they built that beat the human world champion at the game of Go. And they're using techniques from AlphaGo to create a system called Gemini. And Hassabis says this will be more capable than ChatGPT. So Gemini is a large language model similar to GPT-4, which powers ChatGPT. And by injecting some of AlphaGo's intelligence, Hassabis and his team are, quote, aiming to give the system new capabilities, such as planning or the ability to solve problems, according to Wired. Now, Paul, given your long history following DeepMind, what do you make of this story?
I'm very intrigued. I mean, if you haven't watched the AlphaGo documentary, I think it's still free on YouTube. Watch it. It was life changing for me. I mean, just in terms of my understanding what was happening and where it could go. Mike and I also did a pretty in depth summary of AlphaGo and the competition in 2016
Mm-hmm.
in the book. So, Marketing Artificial Intelligence book. There's kind of some context around this and why it matters. So yeah, anything Demis has to do or say, I find worth listening to, and I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of this year they do something pretty significant in this space that changes what you expect these agents to be able to do.
So interestingly, Google is also taking some steps to make AI systems safer and more responsible. They just announced what they're calling their first machine unlearning challenge. And according to Google, this is a competition that considers a realistic scenario in which, after training, a certain subset of the training images must be forgotten to protect the privacy or rights of the individuals concerned. So basically, they're setting up a fictional scenario where we need to stop an AI system from having access to data that it was trained on and forgetting essentially that it was ever trained on it. So this concept of machine unlearning can be used to protect privacy in the future, and it can also be used to erase inaccurate or harmful information from models in the future. So, Paul, it sounds like Google is kind of accelerating steps to make AI systems safer in this way. Was that your kind of read on this?
I think this is a huge deal.
Yeah.
I honestly hadn't really thought about this, and then I saw this and read this, and my guess is there's way more money and resources going into this than we were thinking about or aware of. It's basically a lobotomy for a language model. Like,
Mm.
so, these use cases we just covered are pretty obvious, but if we go back to the synthetic data example, like let's say GPT-5 is trained on some synthetic data, and then partway through the training, they realize that that synthetic data adds zero value and it actually maybe harms the eventual foundational model of GPT-5. How do you get that training data out of it?
Mm.
Do you have to start all over again and just remove it? Or can you actually go in and extract that from its knowledge base? And so as these models continue to learn from either human knowledge or synthetic data, whatever it is, if you decide that there's harmful stuff in there for whatever reason, either it deprecates the output of the machine, or it has harmful information in it, or it learned from just total falsehoods,
Mm.
um, you're going to want to go in and get that out. Or if you want to steer these things to have certain political leanings. So if you're a certain government that wants to have more control around what your citizens see and believe, then you may need to extract things out of the models that you don't want them knowing. Well, to my knowledge, there's no way to do that, which
Yeah.
is why they're doing this. This is like a DARPA style. Like I wouldn't be surprised if DARPA, the Government Defense
Mm.
Advanced Research Project Agency, has some stealth thing going on to do this exact same thing. So the more I thought about this, the more I realized like this is a grand challenge in the future of AI, is to be able to figure out how to get knowledge out of these things. I have no idea how you do it. I'll be fascinated to read the research papers about it.
Yeah. And even just speculating totally here, I have no, in-depth knowledge of this. It sounds like it could be a solution to some of these models being trained on copywritten information and thus
100%.
being sued by the EU or
Yep.
individuals. So,
Yep. I thought the same thing, that they could say, okay, fine, we'll go extract this data set out. If
yeah.
you're Stability AI and you're getting sued by who's the photo company?
Getty Images.
Yeah. If you're getting sued by Getty, for them to say, listen, we'll pay the $200 million fine and we'll go get all the Getty images out of that.
Right.
Today that's not possible to my knowledge. They would have to build a new foundational model that doesn't use those images to start with to get them out. They could not go retroactively and yank them out. So I agree 100%. That's a really interesting use case as well. If you accidentally vacuum up a bunch of copyright material, or the AI Act in the EU says
Yeah.
you can't, and so you retroactively go back and get the stuff out that the AI Act doesn't allow. That's interesting too.
Yeah.
Well, again, all theoretical here. We're just kind
Totally. Yeah.
of brainstorming, but interesting.
Interestingly as well, Google also just changed its privacy policy to say that it can now use public data to help train and create its AI models. So this was a change that it had some limited language in there to that effect before July 1st, but afterwards, Mashable was reporting that it seems like the privacy policy language is much more expansive to allow Google to use information from searches or search behavior to more widely train the company's AI models. Now, Paul, I know some people seemed upset about the changes online, but from my perspective, this seems kind of unsurprising. It's a move from Google, but what did you think about that?
A story, like
right?
I mean,
yeah.
I just assumed all of this. Like I don't. I mean, at this
It
point, aren't we all just conditioned that everything we're doing is training AI in some way? Like I don't know.
Yeah, might have come as a surprise, I guess, to the people complaining online, perhaps.
I don't know. I think the Google's. I think like I saw like a quote from somebody from Google was like, kind of like, really, like this is what we do. Like, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I didn't really think it was too big of a deal.
So if you're seeing this come across your feed, maybe just consider that it's been already trained on you.
Clickbait. Yeah, like I don't know.
All right. So the U.S. House of Representatives just circulated a memo saying that offices within the House are only allowed to use the paid version of ChatGPT moving forward because there are privacy concerns, and ChatGPT Plus has some improved privacy features. And additionally, House offices are not allowed to use any other large language models. Not to mention, this memo circulated some guidelines for how to use the tool, which kind of seems like, Paul, Congress, like many other companies, is waking up to the fact that misuse of ChatGPT can land you very quickly in hot water and lead to major privacy issues. So what did you think about that?
I mean, just another reminder, if your organization does not have generative AI policies that guide the use of generative AI within your organization, get them tomorrow. Like I mean, we're how many months now? 9 months since ChatGPT came out. It's time to set some policies for your team about what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised it took this long for them to do it.
So OpenAI has been hit by another class action lawsuit, and this one is a copyright lawsuit that claims ChatGPT is trained on full novels or books without permission from the authors. So a couple authors leading this lawsuit basically claimed that ChatGPT was able to very accurately summarize their books when asked, which led them to believe, given some documentation in ChatGPT's documentation that says they have trained on some book repositories. They are alleging that OpenAI has essentially hoovered up their books and has used it as training data, which it was not allowed to do. So this is kind of the latest in a series of these lawsuits alleging that OpenAI has used protected data and information to train its models without obtaining consent to do so. So how do you see these lawsuits kind of shaping up? I mean, it's impossible to predict the exact outcomes, but on one hand, they keep happening. On the other hand, the model's already been trained one way or another. So what kind of is the end game here?
I have no idea. I mean, years of legal battles ahead. It does. I mean, they obviously didn't release the training data set for GPT-4, so we don't know like what it's trained on, but it does seem to be eerily good at like writing in a certain style of a novel and continuing on from previous novels. So yeah, I mean, like we said before, it's a great time to be an IP attorney. You know, they're going to be staying very busy for a very long time here. There's going to be class action lawsuits. There's going to be all kinds of interesting things to follow. I have no idea how it all plays out. I just assume lots of penalties are going to be paid, and I don't know. I think it probably impacts more like the future foundational models and what they're
Mm.
allowed to do with those. And I think there's just going to be a lot of, you know, what is it? Beg for forgiveness instead of asking for permission. Like,
Yeah.
they just train these things however they wanted to, and if they find out they weren't allowed to do it, then they'll fix it for the future ones and pay a few penalties. Like, my unlawyer educated guess of how this all eventually plays out, but we'll see.
So, if you want an example of how changes to AI algorithms are affecting us in a day to day fashion, you can look no further than some recent news from LinkedIn. So, LinkedIn just changed their algorithms significantly, which resulted in pretty serious changes to how certain posts and types of content show up in feeds. It looks like LinkedIn is appearing to try to make the content in your feed less kind of viral, clickbaity content and much more relevant to your needs. So they've actually indicated that the algorithms will now reward more posts that share knowledge and advice and have actual meaningful content or comments as they try to crack down on some of the more trying to game the algorithm style content that we've seen on LinkedIn. So, Paul, you're very active on LinkedIn, so I know you had some thoughts on this.
Well, yeah, you and I traded some messages because there was one day I put something up. I think it was the inflection, like the $1.3 billion
Yep.
thing. And so I don't know my average post gets, but it's thousands of impressions. Sometimes it'll hit 10, 20, 50,000. And that thing after 2 hours had like under 100. And I messaged Mike, I'm like, something changed. Like, this is
Hmm.
really weird. There's nothing different about this post. I tweaked a couple of things in it to try and figure out the algorithm change. And then like we did some research and found out that they were messing with the algorithm. It has since seemed to like check up. But yeah, I think it's just a reminder of how captive we are to how these algorithms work. We had the introduction of threads by, Meta last week, and people are already trying to figure out like, how's this algorithm work? How's it determining what to show? And it's so funny because I have almost 20,000 followers on Twitter and I get like almost no engagement. I
Hmm.
have about 100 followers right now on threads, and I get more engagement on posts with 100 followers than I do with 20,000. So it's just, it's always this game of trying to figure out how these algorithms are making the predictions they are, and clustering things together and doing recommendations. And it's the never ending game, but we're always captive to whatever they decide to do.
Always a reminder for us marketers, as our friend Joe Polizzi says, don't rely 100% on someone's shared media to distribute your message, I
Get
suppose.
your own audience.
Yep.
Man.
Okay, so interestingly, the Vatican just released its own handbook on the ethics of artificial intelligence. It's called Ethics in the Age of Disruptive Technologies: An Operational Roadmap. And basically, it is a bunch of guidelines and suggestions that are meant to guide the tech industry through ethics in AI, machine learning, encryption, data usage, tracking, etc. Now, according to Gizmodo, they said, quote, rather than wait for governments to set rules for industry, they are hoping to provide guidance for people within tech companies who are already wrestling with AI's most difficult question. So, Paul, what did you make of this? I thought it was pretty interesting, but kind of a demonstration that, I guess maybe ethical guidelines don't just have to come from Silicon Valley.
I don't know. Did you read it? Like,
I read the coverage of it. It seems like so far it seems pretty standard
okay.
guidelines that you
I
might
don't know.
see. I
I
would
mean,
have to dive super deep into it. I guess I guess they comment the Vatican comments fairly often on social issues, but I just don't know if like how they're thinking about
Yeah, I didn't
this.
see. I guess that was my take. Is like, I guess that's nice. Like, I don't know that the Vatican is who I turn to guide, AI
Right.
and business.
Right.
Um, but I don't want to prejudge it. So I just like it says the biggest anchor principle is broken down into 7 guidelines, such as respect for human dignity and rights, promote
Hmm.
transparency and explainability. Like, yeah, I mean, okay, cool.
Yep.
Like, um, yeah, I mean, if if a lot of people listen and attribute credibility and authority to what they're saying, and it
Right.
helps align this in a responsible way, wonderful. I don't think of the Vatican as my go-to source for this kind of thing. But again, the massive influence and hopefully can positively affect this stuff in a responsible way, then wonderful. But yeah, I was more like it just didn't jive with me at first. It's like, okay, I get the White House releasing something, but
Yeah.
the
Right.
Vatican was sort of felt like out of right field to me. But yeah, maybe they're looked at more for that than I know of.
They might have seen that viral Mid-Journey deepfake of Pope Francis, like
Decided to get in the game.
dressed up, and they wanted to comment, I suppose. Okay, as we wrap up here, we're going to talk in a second about, as our final topic, the Macon final agenda and keynote highlights. But we did want to talk quickly about Meta releasing Threads. So for anyone who's been living under a rock, Meta released essentially a competitor to Twitter, which I'm seeing a report from an hour ago from The Verge that it has now already reached 100 million users. It's very, very easy to sign up through Instagram, so that's probably something to do with it. But basically, you can, they're trying to, I guess, directly compete with Twitter and some of the perceived weaknesses that platform has. Paul, have you tried out Threads? Are you
I have
interested in this?
not. No, I hate that it exists. Honestly, and I'm just being straight up. Like, I do not want another social network to have to go to. I just want Twitter to work. I want it to be not as unpleasant of a place to be. I feel like it has recent months has not been as um, valuable as maybe previously. But my use of Twitter is so specific. Like, I have very specific lists. I have a highly curated group of people that I get alerts from, mainly around AI news and sports. So it's like
Hmm.
that's how I use Twitter. So a lot of the other noise, I don't even really experience it. Like, I just want this highly curated list of people. I want to know what they're thinking and what they're sharing and what they're reading, because it's how I stay up on stuff. Threads has none of that. There's no lists. There's like this, it's a free for all of who's even over there. They're saying they don't want it to be a news site. It's like, well, okay. So, no, personally, I just want Twitter to work and to be done with all the craziness around it, just be functional. Um, uh, I don't know. I mean, I guess competition's good. I always think it's funny how tech companies just literally copy each other. I think there's already a $90 million lawsuit against Zuckerberg and Meta for poaching talent supposedly and copying, like, which I have no idea if it's true or not. But it's funny that it literally just looks like Twitter. Like, if you're in the app, you actually have to scroll to the top and say, "Wait, am I in Threads or in Twitter right now?" Like, I don't. They look so similar, but Threads has almost no functionality. You can't build lists. You can't affect the news feed. So I'm sure they're going to add all that. But no, I don't want to have to go into another place and rebuild a following and build all these lists
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah. I saw a lot of journalists jumping over there and being like, "Hey, come follow me." And it's like I
Yeah.
can't imagine
And people are just
how.
cross posting again. It's just
Right,
like
right.
whatever I put on Twitter, I'm going to put on here and see
Yeah.
what happens. And nobody knows how to use it. And it's just messy. And no, I don't like it. But there
Well,
you go.
let's end on
But I'm
something.
on there. If you want to follow me on Threads, follow me on Threads.
Let's end on something that we both definitely like, which is the Marketing AI Conference, MACON, which is happening this month in a couple weeks here, July 26th to the 28th in our hometown of Cleveland, Ohio.
Just
And
2 weeks
Paul,
away.
I know.
Ugh,
I
I
didn't
gotta
want to
bill my
put too
checks.
I didn't want to put too specific a number on it because I don't want to stress out or stress you out.
Oh yeah.
um,
Anybody who listened to like our AI Writers Summit stuff earlier this year and how long it took me to get my final presentation ready, we are entering that zone again. I've not started the presentation. I'm doing like the state of AI for marketing and business. I'm going to try and like, where are we at? Like, what is going on? Pick like the major themes. So I have to build that. And then, yeah, I check out the agenda. Just macon.ai, MAICON.ai. You can use AI Pod 100 for $100 off code. It's an amazing agenda. There's actually a final keynote I cannot say right now. It may be announced by this time the podcast come out, but I can't yet announce it. But we have an amazing final keynote we're adding. It's just an incredible lineup. Really, it's going to be an amazing experience. It's trending towards selling out. So if you're thinking about going, I would get your tickets this week. We may not sell, but it's definitely trending in that direction. Mike and I are each teaching workshops on day one. Those are optional on the 26th. And then the 27th and 28th, they're just going to be, amazing content. There's 3 tracks, bunch of incredible general sessions. So yeah, check it out. We'd love to see you in Cleveland. Still got a couple weeks to get your situation, get your flights, get your hotels, and be with us there. So yeah, check that out, macon.ai.
Awesome. Well, Paul, I think we've certainly covered plenty of material, and
we got to stop taking weeks off, man.
Yeah,
right. Too much to cover when we do 2 weeks.
Yeah, like 30 rapid fire topics in 2 weeks. So thank you as always for sharing your insights with our audience. I know everyone appreciates it.
All right, we'll talk to you all next week. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening to the Marketing AI Show. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And if you're ready to continue your learning, head over to marketingaiinstitute.com. Be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, check out our free monthly webinars, and explore dozens of online courses and professional certifications. Until next time, stay curious and explore AI.